Hello and welcome back to Annie Makes Art School. Today we're doing a follow-up to our Intro to Color Theory where I'm going to specifically address some of the questions that you guys had. We're going to delve more into some of the terminology behind color theory and different ways of combining elements to create contrast or an appealing palette. As always, feel free to drop additional questions in the comments and I can follow up with them in the next section, whether it has to do with additional color theory or any other subject in art that you'd like me to weigh in on. And of course, let's remember that art is a matter of opinion above all else, that there are very few absolute right or wrong answers, and that more than anything, we're just looking to have a good time. Let's get started. To start things off today, I've got two larger versions of our color wheels from session 1. Our lower color wheel is a red, yellow, blue primary, and our top color wheel is a cyan, yellow, and magenta primary. Both of these are going to work for what we're discussing, so I thought it would help to have them on screen. And as a reminder, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, please revisit Intro to Color Theory, where I discuss the differences between these two color sets. Also bear in mind that if you ever need additional visuals for the things that I discuss in our sessions, I do post them on my Instagram. My handle is right here, AKSIEG, and I'll be giving a recap as well as some close-up pictures of all the notes that I discuss after each session. Now, our first concept we began to dive into in Color Theory 1, but we're going to expand on. So in Theory 1, we discussed complementary colors, but now we're going to add on top of that what a split complementary is. For these purposes, I've created two nifty little tools. Our first one is going to show us our complementary colors. So if I find any space on the color wheel and I overlay this, it's going to show me which two colors are exactly opposite. So in this case, my red and my green are complementary colors. I can apply the same thing on my CMYK color scale. In this case, I've got a cyan across from a kind of reddish orange, or I could have this raspberry color across from a spring green. If you combine complementary colors, they're going to neutralize each other out, just like we discussed in Color Theory 1. And if you put them next to each other, they're going to create a very bright contrast. A split complementary is the same idea, but a little bit more toned down version, meaning that I've got my little Star Trek symbol here, and wherever I place it, in this case if I put it on, say, yellow, it's going to show me that while purple would be my complementary color and would have a very high contrast, if I pair that yellow with a raspberry or a blue, it's going to be a little bit more gentle combination. Same thing if I go over to my RYB color scale, I could pair this kind of teal blue-green color with either a red or an orange, and it's going to have a nice split complementary. If we take my original red-green example, instead of pairing green with that full opposite red, I could combine it with this sort of plum color or this sunset orangey red to get a more gentle combination that's still going to have that pop. Our next concept is primary, secondary, and tertiary colors, and for this I've got a handy triangle. So if I place this triangle down, it's going to show me that my primary colors on this color wheel, as I mentioned, are cyan, magenta, and yellow, and on this color wheel are red, yellow, and blue. The points are showing me what those primaries are. A secondary color is any color that's made by combining equal parts of two primaries. These are found just by shifting my triangle. So if I turn it to the points in between, I'm now going to see that the secondary color I get from combining red and yellow is orange. From combining red and blue, I get purple. From combining blue and yellow, I get green. Tertiary colors are everything that's left, so it's the points that fall in between primary and secondary colors. So if I look at this example, I've got red as my primary and orange as my secondary. In between them, a tertiary would be kind of a sunset color, this reddish orange. That covers our primary, secondary, and tertiary. A related concept is triadic combinations. Triadic combinations are any three colors that are equally spaced on the color wheel. So we just discussed two examples of that. Our primary colors are already a triadic combination, as are our secondary colors. They are equally spaced on the color wheel, so put together, they have a sense of unity visually. But there are also triadic combinations that exist between them. So if I continue turning that and go, for example, to sunset, indigo, and pear, those three colors are going to have a sense of visual harmony if I use them within the same piece, because they're equally spaced around the wheel. The last concept we're going to use our color wheels for today is analog colors. This is the idea that any three colors that are next to each other on the color wheel are going to look pleasing to the eye when used together. For this, I've got my little Pac-Man here. So if I place my Pac-Man at any portion of the color wheel, it's going to show me three colors that look really pleasing to the eye paired together. In this case, green, teal, and cyan. As you can see just looking at them, there's a sense of harmony between those colors because they obviously blend from one to another. I can do the same thing on my RYB color scale. Here we've got a sample of yellow, amber, and orange. Those three colors, if used in a logo design or a painting, are going to be very pleasant to the eye because they have that clear, smooth connection between them. Now we're going to step away from our color wheels for a moment to talk about monochrome. This is something I got questions from a few of you about, and basically the idea is that a monochrome uses a single chroma or a single hue. In this case, I used cyan across all of these swatches. What makes the difference in colors is the adding of tints, tones, and shades, which you might remember from our intro to color theory is the addition of white, gray, or black to that initial color. The reason that a lot of people have questions about monochrome is often a label that is misplaced within the art world, meaning that people will think of something as monochrome when it actually is not. In order to be truly monochrome, the image needs to use only that initial color and the addition of black, white, or gray, but oftentimes something that looks monochrome might actually include the blending of other colors. Like if I took this initial hue right here and I added in a tiny bit of yellow to get a slightly different version of that cyan. Now when I incorporate it, it'll still have a sense of harmony in the piece, but it would not technically qualify as monochrome because I've added an additional color. For example, if I take this painting I did of an oyster, on first glance, some people might label this monochrome because it is primarily relying on these orangey tones, but you can tell right away that there are other colors incorporated in the use of it. Then someone might say, all right, well the painting itself is not monochrome, but the background is. But that's not actually true. If we take a closer look, the shadow of the oyster incorporates some purples, we've got some yellows and other colors mixed in along the way. This is not one color mixed only with black, white, and gray. It's actually several colors used in different ways across the image. Now this, by comparison, is an actual example of a monochrome image. This kind of orangey red-brown hue has been lightened or darkened in different sections of the image. However, there is no additional color added anywhere to it. It is all a single hue. Sometimes use of a single hue, a real honest monochrome, can come across kind of flat. So a lot of times artists will intentionally add additional pigments to try and mix it up and break it from that pure, true monochrome. There's no right or wrong answer, it's a matter of what effect you're looking for. I also wanted to mention as a note that some artists do this by pre-mixing their color with various degrees of white, black, or gray, and some artists do this by doing a full black and white underpainting and then glazing over top with that single hue. There's lots of different ways to approach it. Again, it's just a matter of what works for you. The last concept I wanted to tackle today is one that we're going to get into a lot more in future videos, and that is the emotional or psychological connection to colors. So we've discussed a lot of different versions of palettes, but let's look at them in application using some examples of abstract pieces. So first let's talk about warm versus cool colors. Here we have an example of a warm palette. It's got bold, bright yellows, reds, oranges, and pinks. This gives us a sense of a lot of passion and movement and literal warmth. You can almost feel it radiating off the page. By comparison, we have a composition here that is much cooler. You'll notice I said cooler and not cool. Yellow is still a warm color and is still streaked through, but with the majority of the page being this kind of mossy green and bright teal, we have a very different tone to this piece compared to this piece. Our cooler tone tends to bring out more melancholy, more calmness, while our warmer tones tend to bring out more sense of passion and movement. There are, of course, exceptions, but this is helpful in knowing when you're approaching a piece. Similarly, we talked earlier about analog colors that are close to each other on the color wheel and go well together. If we bring our color wheel back into the picture, we can see that this color palette relies heavily on the analog colors in this area. Even though our yellow is warm and our green is cool, the blend between that yellow and that teal, showing each of those stages, gives us a sense of unity across the piece. By comparison, I've got a piece here that uses similar colors, but has a very different effect. By cutting out some of the steps, and instead of showing all of these blends between colors, this picture jumps directly from more of a teal blue to a bright orangey red, which as you can see are on opposite sides of the color wheel. That contrast gives us a sense of pop and movement and fire, as opposed to calm and relaxation. As with most of the things that we discuss in these sessions, I like to think of color theory more as a set of tools that are available to you, as opposed to rules that should feel binding or restrictive. As you're moving forward in your own creation process, I suggest that you think about things like how you lay out your colors, how you place them next to each other, and what message you're trying to generate with them. And don't feel like you're then bound to use exactly the most obvious answer to it. So for example, if I'm trying to create a portrait that's intended to look joyous and happy, the logical choice would be to use warmer, brighter colors like yellows and oranges. But before you dive in, ask yourself, Is there a reason it might be interesting in this piece to actually incorporate more melancholy tones? Is there still a way for me to get that sense of joy and passion while using a palette that suggests that maybe there's something more complicated going on? There's never a right or wrong answer when it comes to creating your work. It's just a matter of you finding what's going to create the message that you intend. I hope this was helpful. There will definitely be more on color theory down the line, and as always, please let me know in the comments if there are other questions that you have or other topics that you would like for me to tackle. Thanks!